All right, here we go. Saving seeds from vegetables. My name's Cherie Schaefer. I'm the horticulture agent here from at CSU Extension in Pueblo County in Colorado. I see that we do have people from all over the country, so that is awesome. Welcome. It's a very warm second day of fall here in Colorado. So here's a little outline of what we're going to be discussing today. Why save seed? Maybe you've never really thought about it and you're wondering, why would I do that? We'll go over some history of people saving seed and then kind of go over the basics, some terminology, things like that. Some things that you should consider before you save seed, before you choose the plants that you're going to save seed from. And then we'll spend a fair amount of time on pollination methods. This is a pretty important thing to understand before you start trying to save seed from a certain type of vegetable, especially when it comes to how far to keep them apart, if they're going to cross-pollinate, things like that. So we will give you kind of a list of some of the most common vegetables and what their pollination methods are. We'll also touch on biennials in their own little section because they can kind of be very unique and special when it comes to saving seeds from them. Open pollinated versus hybrid versus what is an heirloom. We'll go over all of that kind of stuff. Won't get too deep into the details of the genetics because that could just be an entire class on its own, but we will touch on it and give you kind of the info you need to get started with seed saving. And then I just picked some of the, I guess, easiest and most common vegetables that people would save seeds from. And we'll go over some specifics on exactly how you'd save seeds from specific vegetables. And then, of course, how to store those seeds to get the longest shelf life possible and to keep your germination rates as high as possible. So why save seed? Sorry, let me get this out of my hair. Plants that you save seed from and then you plant the seeds year after year after year, those plants become adapted to the local climate and the local soil and exactly the spot that you're growing them in. So year after year after year, they'll be better and better in your garden if you keep saving that seed and keep planting it. You can also keep growing plants that you like. Let's say, you had some really amazing tomato plant in your garden this year and maybe it's kind of unique and you're not sure if you're going to be able to find that seed again, or maybe somebody just gave you a plant. Saving the seed will allow you to keep growing that unique plant year after year after year. You can also start to control some desirable characteristics of the plants. So let's say you really want to start getting tomatoes early in the year. You want to be the first one on the block getting a tomato. You can start saving seeds from the earliest tomato that you get on the plant. Plant that year after year and keep doing that. You'll start to kind of select for that trait of the early forming tomatoes. And you can kind of control that a little bit by saving the seeds from the specific fruit. You can also, maybe you want to get them way into October, start saving seeds from the later growing tomatoes. So you can really be in control of the characteristics that you want to see in your future garden. You save money. Seed saving is essentially free. There's not a lot of materials that you need. You already have the plants, and sometimes seed packets can be a little bit overpriced. So you can definitely save yourself some cash by saving your own seed. And you can share with friends and neighbors. Everybody likes to get a few seeds from somebody that says, I grew this plant in my garden. It was amazing. It tasted so good. It did so well. And, it's kind of vetted by somebody already. So your friends and neighbors will definitely appreciate to get some of the seed that you saved. So there's a long history of saving seed. Long before there were commercial seed companies, this is how people propagated their plants year after year. Home gardeners have been saving seeds for, hundreds of years. Normally gardeners would save seeds from their best plants, just like what you are probably going to do in your own garden, and then sow them year after year after year. over time, this has improved species and varieties. That's where we got a lot of the varieties that we have now, from people improving them and planting them year after year after year. In modern times, commercial seed companies pretty much maintain and improve all the varieties, but seed saving has been becoming very popular lately, and it's kind of coming back into style, and you can absolutely still do it yourself. You don't need to rely on the commercial seed companies to do it for you. It's pretty easy, and it's kind of a fun little project to do. And I will just do a little plug here for a local project that we have called the All Pueblo Grows Seed Lending Library. Now, this is a local Pueblo, Colorado project. Many of you probably know about it. Many of you are involved in it, I'm sure. But it is a project where we collect seeds, we package them, do some research so you know how to grow them, and they actually are usually in a physical catalog at the Rawlings Library in Pueblo, and people can go and check out the seeds. They're free, and we ask that they grow them, learn to save seed from us because we do monthly educational events, and then bring us back some of that seed that they saved. So you don't actually return the same packet of seeds, but we hope that they return seeds that they grew from the plants they grew using the seed library. And this isn't a unique project in Pueblo, Colorado. If you are somewhere else, it's probably pretty likely that you have a seed library somewhere near you. So give it a Google, talk to your local extension office and see if they might know, or your local library district. It's they're popping up all over the country, and it's a really, really neat idea. So let's talk basics. When you are going to start your new garden in the spring, you basically either have seeds or transplants. Some gardeners start everything from seeds, some gardeners start everything from transplants, or a mix of the two. And so here's a diagram of a seed. It did come out a little blurry, I'm sorry about that, but there are some parts inside of a seed. Inside of a seed, mainly you have a dormant embryo, just waiting to wake up and make a plant. So under favorable conditions, which are typically warm, moist, maybe dark for most seeds kind of conditions, the dormancy of the embryo will break and it will sprout, it will germinate. And then the plant that grows from that seed is based on the genetic makeup, the DNA that was contained in that seed, in that embryo. So that's what determines the characteristics of the plants. Transplants now are actual living plants or plant parts. So maybe if you plant bulbs, tubers, corms, cuttings, or whole living plants that you just buy at the garden center in spring, those are transplants. They, might have been made from seed. They might have been a cutting, in which case they're a genetic clone of the plant that they came from. Now, gardeners will commonly dig up dahlias and gladiolas and things like that in the fall and, save them in their garage and some peat moss and plant them the next spring. But seed saving has been a little bit less common in recent years, although it is starting to see an uptick in interest, like I mentioned. So it's kind of along those same lines, how you dig your dahlias and dig your gladiolas. It's the same thing. You're just saving some seed from your vegetable garden as well. And like I mentioned, there are some considerations that you want to think about before you start saving seeds. So what are my desired qualities? Do I want to save seed from the biggest, juiciest tomato on the vine, the earliest tomato, the latest? Maybe I like the small ones. Maybe I like a plant that's kind of grew nice and bushy or something like that. So what is it about the plant that you'd like to keep replicating? Those are the desired qualities that you should look at and save the seeds from those plants. Of course, I kind of already touched on, you need to know the method of pollination. It's so important to know how it's being pollinated, how that seed is being formed and produced before you go about trying to save it. There's a lot of mistakes that can be made if you don't know exactly how things are working for that specific plant, and we will touch on that in more detail. The time of seed bearing. Some plants are going to start producing seed really early, springtime. Other plants aren't going to produce seed till later in the fall. where is the seed is another one. You know, tomatoes, squash, pepper, stuff like that, it's pretty easy and obvious. It's in the fruit, you know, but things that we don't eat the fruit, like, you know, lettuce, spinach, stuff like that, carrots, where are those seeds located? So that's something definitely to consider. When are they formed and where are they located and how do I get them? How do I harvest them? Is the plant a hybrid? We will touch on this. Is it open pollinated or hybrid? That's definitely something to consider and to find out about a variety before you try saving seed from it. And the method of seed collection. There's a lot of different methods. We'll go over a few. Some are super easy, some are a little more involved. So if I don't touch on a plant that you specifically want to save seed from, there's a lot of information on the internet, and I can definitely help you to figure out how to save seed from a specific plant, but we will touch on some of the most popular ones today. And then how are you going to store all this seed that you save? You don't want to go through all the trouble of saving your seed, choosing your plants, and then store it in a way that will negatively affect your germination the next year. So it is important to have a plan for storage ready to go. All right, so I've been telling you how important it is, so let's talk about pollination methods. If you want a seed to produce a plant that has the same genetic makeup as the parent plant, it must be pollinated with pollen from the same variety. If pollination is occurring with pollen from another variety, the seed, the plant that grows from the seed you collect, is going to result in a cross between those two varieties. So it's not going to be exactly like plant A or exactly like plant B. You'll probably end up getting something kind of in the middle. So that's why it's important to know how things are pollinated, what kind of precautions you need to take to prevent crossing, or maybe you're super experimental and you want to try a cross. You want to see what happens when you cross plant A with plant B. And knowing how they're pollinated will help you to perform that experiment. So there's really 3 pollination methods. There's a lot of pollination methods in the world, but the 3 that are really going to be of concern to you if you're trying to save seed from vegetables are going to be wind pollinated plants, your kind of typical insect pollinated plants that bees pollinate, and then self-pollinated plants that can actually, the pollen from the same flower fertilizes that same flower, and that's how it gets pollinated and produces its fruit. So those are the 3 that we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into, and I'm going to give you a list of plants that have these kind of 3 different methods. So the big question always is, you know, how far do I need to separate blank vegetable from other varieties so that it will not cross and I can get seed that's true to the variety? Here's your answer, depending on how it's pollinated. So wind pollinated plants are going to be your hardest ones to keep secluded from other varieties. You cannot have another variety of a wind pollinated plant shedding pollen within a mile. The closer they are, the more likely they're going to cross. So, you know, if you kind of live somewhere a little more rural and you have a lot of space, that's definitely doable. If you live in the city, your neighbor's backyard is probably much closer than a mile. So you can't really control what varieties they have growing in their yard or, you know, what somebody down the block is growing. So it becomes a little bit hard, depending on the space that you're working with, to keep a wind pollinated plant secluded. Now, insect pollinated plants gets a little bit easier. You need to have about a 1/4 mile separating different varieties. Of course, if they are a 1/4 mile apart, you know, you can't tell a bee, hey, you can only fly a 1/4 mile to pollinate plants. They'll fly as much as they want, but you have a really good chance of keeping them separate if you have a 1/4 mile between different varieties. Again, that might be kind of hard depending on where you live and if your neighbors are also vegetable gardening. Self-pollinated plants are the easiest to keep from crossing and the easiest to save true seed from. The pollen is transferred within one flower. It has the male parts that are making the pollen and the female parts receiving the pollen within one flower, pollinating itself, so it's easy to kind of keep that contained. Of course, some can escape. Sometimes insects will visit these self-pollinating plants anyway, regardless, and they can kind of cause some crossover between the pollen. But if you separate those varieties by even just a few rows in your own garden, the chances are going to be pretty low that they'll cross, but just do keep in mind nature does what it does, and there's still a chance that they might cross. So you're probably wondering, well, how are the plants that I want to save seed from pollinated? Well, here is kind of a short list. Again, if the plant that you're interested in isn't on this list, you can definitely, this should be pretty easy, something pretty easy to just Google and find out how it's pollinated. Another great question to call and ask your local extension office. So your wind pollinated plants, the ones that are going to be kind of hard to keep separate from other varieties, beets, spinach, corn, of course, and Swiss chard. You can see there's a pretty large list of insect pollinated plants. These ones are kind of in the middle. You want to give them about a quarter mile. But, broccoli, melons, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, carrots, some of the herbs, peppers, pumpkins, squash, radishes, eggplant. You can read the whole list there. But these are things that are insect pollinated, need insects to be pollinated, and you want to give them about a quarter mile of space. Now this last row, the self-pollinated plants, these are the easy ones to save seed from. And if you're a beginner, I would start here. So your beans, lettuce, chicory, peas, endive, and tomatoes. These are the ones that can pollinate themselves. Not a whole lot of big chances of crossing, and these are kind of going to be just the easiest ones to go with. Let's talk biennials. Biennials, for those who aren't familiar with plant life cycles, they grow vegetatively in their first year. So what that means is they're growing their roots, their stems, and their leaves. Those are the vegetative structures of a plant. They don't grow any of their reproductive structures, which would be flowers and seeds, at all in the first year. So if you plant a carrot seed, for example, it's going, and you just want to harvest carrots, that's great. You do it the first year because the carrot's the root, and it grows roots, stems, and leaves the first year. But if you're interested in saving seed from a biennial plant, to be safe, you can dig them up, store them at the end of the year like you would do with your dahlias, your gladiolas. 32 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit is ideal, maybe in some peat moss or something like that. And then replant them the next spring so that they can produce their reproductive structures, their flowers, and their seed that you can save. Now, depending on where you live, how well you kind of winterize your garden, your soil, there's a lot of factors here, and the plant, of course, you might be able to overwinter a biennial and not have to go through the digging it up at the end of the year and storing it. If you're not sure, you can maybe try a couple plants to overwinter them and dig up the rest so that you still definitely have some. Ask gardeners around you. Have you been able to overwinter? What have you been able to overwinter in our area? And what do you do to keep them good over the winter? But, if you're not sure, just go ahead and dig them up and save them. So here's a list of biennials. Of course, carrots are kind of the classic example, but there's a lot of other garden examples of things that you might need to do that for if you're interested to save seed. A lot of them are going to be the kind of root crops that we grow. So let's talk a little bit about open pollinated plants versus hybrid plants. Again, this topic you can take a really deep dive into genetics and different generations and talk about Gregor Mendel and the pea experiments. There's a lot to get into. It's super interesting, and I would suggest you look more into it if you are interested. There's some really great articles online where you can read more about it. I'm just going to touch on it though and keep it kind of simple, just for a beginning seed saver, what you might need to know. So hybrids. Hybrid seeds have been deliberately crossbred, two different varieties that a seed company or something like that deliberately crossed to get a desired result. Typically a packet of hybrid seeds are going to be more expensive than an open pollinated seed packet because it does take more work to have to maintain two separate varieties and kind of manage the cross and things like that. But hybrid plants are typically more uniform and more reliable when it comes to their fruit production. Now, you can't typically save seed from a hybrid plant and have it come back true to type, have it come back like the parent plant was, because it's not one variety, and we have a lot of genetics going on, and it's not going to come back exactly like the parent plant. Although I have had a couple of volunteers express to me that some of the older hybrid varieties, they have gotten to come back pretty true to type. So hybrids do seem to stabilize over time. If there's a variety that's, been around for a long time, the genetics kind of start to stabilize, and you might get something that's pretty close to the parent plant. So, if it's a hybrid and you want to give it a shot and you have some extra garden space to experiment, I'd say give it a whirl. Why not? So a couple examples of some hybrid varieties of tomatoes that you might have in your garden would be the Big Boy and the Early Girls. So, Big Boys were probably selectively bred to be that big, meaty tomato, and Early Girls, of course, to be a more early forming tomato. Now, open pollinated seeds are plants and varieties that have been totally isolated from other varieties. The seeds are true to type. They have only the genetics of that one variety. So you can save the seed and you will get a plant that is true to the parent plant, that will be just like the parent plant, so long as you didn't have any crossing occur in your garden. Now, the fruits and things that the plants produce will be similar to each other, but they're not as uniform in, size and shape as hybrids tend to be. So, that might be a positive or a negative to you. You might want something super uniform and regular and reliable, or you might be willing to kind of see what you get as far as shape and size go. And that might be interesting to you. If they are kept separate, like I said, you can save the seed and they should be true to type. Some examples of open pollinated tomatoes in your garden would be the Arkansas Traveler and the Cherokee Purple tomatoes. Now, you've probably heard the term heirloom. So an heirloom variety is basically an open pollinated variety that's over 50 years old, that's existed for over 50 years. Usually, they have some kind of sentimental meanings. They've been passed down from generation to generation. The work's been done to keep them separate and true to their type for many, many years. So heirlooms are desired for that reason. And you can see how a variety would become an heirloom over time. There's other different definitions, but one consistent one is over 50 years. So let's get into harvesting seeds from specific plants. And we're going to start with tomatoes. Tomatoes, if you remember, are one of those self-pollinated plants, so it's going to be really easy to keep these true to type. It's a really good beginner's plant to start saving seed from, and it's a pretty popular one to grow in a vegetable garden. There is a bit of a process when it comes to actually saving the seed, but it's not difficult, and let's talk about that now. So tomato seeds need to be fermented. And the reason is that, we've all eaten a tomato. There's a kind of like gel coating surrounding the seeds. And the purpose of that gel coating is basically to keep them from germinating. So we want to remove that so that when it comes time to plant them, that's not going to inhibit them from germinating. So what you want to do is allow the fruit to ripen. You want it to get pretty ripe. Pretty red, pretty soft, depending on the variety red, but typically. And then you're going to scoop out the seeds and the gel coating into a glass jar. At that point, you're going to cover the seeds and the gel coating with water, maybe 2 to 3 times the volume that you have of seeds and gel of water, and shake it up. And you're going to want to swirl or shake that mixture about twice a day. Within 5 days, the mixture will start to ferment and the seeds will sink to the bottom, and then you'll have some of the gel, and the seeds that are not viable will rise to the top, and you can kind of pour that off, rinse the seeds off, and the ones that are on the bottom of the jar are the good viable seeds that you want to save for next year. So once that kind of 5 days has happened, you get them all clean, you can spread them out on a paper towel to dry, and you're good to go. So I will show you, I have some tomato seeds fermenting in a jar, which I will show you after the PowerPoint is over so that everybody can see on the camera. So yeah, you can, it's a little bit of a process, but it's not hard. All it really requires is some glass jars and maybe like a week or so, and you've got yourself some self-saved tomato seeds. So squash, again, you want to let the squash mature past the point that you'd want to eat it. So it's going to get pretty ripe and start to get to the point that you would probably be like, oh, that's a little too ripe for eating. That's perfect for seed saving. So particularly when it comes to winter squash, the rind should be hardened by the time you're ready to save seeds. You can go ahead and perform the fermenting process described for tomatoes. Might take a little bit less time because they don't have as thick of a gel coating usually. For melons, you don't really need to do the fermenting. You can just go ahead and simply wash them and dry them. And just a little tip for pretty much any of these seeds, the seeds are thoroughly and adequately dried when they can easily snap right in half. So that's a good sign that your seeds are ready to be stored. Beans and peas, another really easy one to save because they are self-pollinating. So again, allow the pods to remain on the plant until they are totally dry. That's kind of the best way to do it. You should be able to shake the pod and hear the seeds rattling inside. Now, don't jump the gun too much. This might take about a month after you would normally harvest them for eating. So, you harvest them for eating, hold off another month, let those ones dry. You can pick the pods and let the pods just dry indoors. Give them a couple weeks before you shell them. You can also just leave the seeds in the pods until planting time next year. If you're planning to definitely plant those seeds the next year, you can absolutely just leave them in the pods. If you kind of want to get a few years out of them, you might want to take them out of the pods and make sure you get them real dry so that you can get a longer shelf life off of them. Lettuce. Lettuce is a little bit more difficult just because, it's not that we're saving seed from the actual part of the plant that we eat. So you actually have to let it go to seed, which if you're growing lettuce to eat is something you don't want. That's called bolting. Your lettuce bolts sometimes when it gets too hot and stuff like that. If you want to save the seeds, you do want it to bolt and you do want it to form those seed stalks. So they'll send up stalks and the seeds will become this like white fluffy structure on the top. So you want to cut off those stalks when they appear nice and fluffy. You don't want the seeds to be completely dry. If you allow them to get completely dry, they're just going to fall off the plant and into the soil. So you want to get them before they actually shed off the stalk and fall into the soil. Bring those seed stalks indoors, and then you kind of just have to shake the seeds off. So you can use a little screen to separate the seed from the chaff. And the chaff is a term to just describe kind of all the other parts of that seed head and the seed stalk that you don't want, that's not seed. And then you just kind of separate the seed and kind of get rid of the chaff, and there you have it. Peppers. You, again, pretty much with everything, want them to stay on the plant until they're fully ripe and actually starting to wrinkle a little bit. So they're getting real ripe. And then this one's real easy. You just scrape out the seeds, spread them out onto a paper towel to dry, give them a little rinse before that if you want to. And that's that for peppers. So as far as the actual seed saving, peppers are super easy. All right, and storing seeds. So think about the conditions that you want to have for germination of a seed. You want it to be warm and moist. When storing seeds, you want to go exactly opposite. We want to go dry and cool, because what we're doing is we want to prevent germination and have them store until we are ready for them to germinate, and we give them those warm, moist conditions. So dry and cool is the name of the game when it comes to storing seeds. Now, if you save seeds from your garden, put them in a jar, they're going to store room temperature on a shelf in your kitchen or wherever for a year for sure. They're definitely going to be good the next year. You know, of course, germination rates are different for every plant, but so you might get some that don't germinate, but you should have pretty good rates the next year. If you are looking to get more than 1 year out of seeds that you're storing, you will maybe want to go through a little bit more of a drying process. And what we're looking for is to get 8% moisture. If you can get those seeds down to 8% moisture, you can store them for up to 10 years. And it's like, how would I know what 8% moisture is for a given seed? I know, you wouldn't. But here's some tips on getting there. You can dry them kind of in the shade on a really hot day for about 6 hours. You can use your oven with the door open at 100 degrees Fahrenheit for about 6 hours, and then cool them down. Store them in a moisture-proof container, so a sealed can or a sealed glass jar, and you want them to be very cool and very dry at this point. And pop them in the refrigerator in that jar, and you should be able to get multiple years out of them if you go through that process. Now, beans and peas are a little bit susceptible to over drying, and the germination rates will definitely be affected if they get over dry. So just take that into account when it comes to those two seeds specifically. And, just be sure that you're not going too far on the drying. So that is what I have. I'm sure that there are questions. Would love to answer them if you want to pop them into the chat. But I will just leave this up for a second. You can absolutely feel free to contact me if you have questions that you think of after this Zoom session at my email address right there, schaefers@pueblocounty.us. Happy to answer questions from anybody about anything horticulture related. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so I can see the chat. And I would love to hear from some people in the chat who might have questions.
Hey, Sherry, thanks for that. I am up in Gilpin County, and I am curious, just thought the other day about our native sage that we have up here. I know it's not a vegetable, but wanting to maybe save some seeds from wildland areas and bring them to my house to plant. Do you know anything about saving a sage? It's not
it's not like culinary sage. It's like
that's the word I was looking for. Yeah, it's just the native sage.
So I will say I'm definitely not the expert on that. And we had a class scheduled saving seeds from natives earlier in the summer, but due to COVID, it had to get canceled. But I had a teacher coming in to do that, and unfortunately, she wasn't interested with Zoom. So I guess I would need to do a little bit of research into that. Totally happy to do that, and to even hook you up with the instructor that I have who was going to teach that class. If you maybe want to get a hold of me.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. I'll just be in touch. Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Perfect.
Thanks.
I do see some questions coming in on the chat. If anybody else wants to unmute and ask that question, totally fine. Let's see, I have, how about freezing seeds for a few days to kill any insects? That's a pretty good idea, actually, in case there might be anything hiding out. Oops, my Alexa's talking to me. Sorry about that. If you get the seeds really well separated from all the chaff and stuff, know that it would be so big of a deal that you might have insects. But yeah, if that is a concern, that's absolutely something that you can try. Can you use a dehydrator to dry seeds? I think so. I think you can absolutely do that, because if you think of the oven at 100 degrees with the door open, that's kind of a similar environment. So yeah, if you have a dehydrator, I think you can absolutely do that. Tips for separating seeds from the chaff. It's CHAFF. Yes. So we have, for the seed library, we had some volunteers that built these very simple sifters that they're basically like a wood box without a top or a bottom, so just kind of a frame, and then different sizes of screen on the bottom. And so it kind of depends on the size of the seed that you're trying to get, but that way you can kind of shake the seed through, or maybe you're shaking the chaff through and keeping the seed in through that screen in that box. And those are real cheap and easy to make, and that's a really good way. Kind of just by hand is the other way. And if you don't get it all, you can just plant some of the chaff the next year. But the sifters are probably the best way that I have encountered. There's a lot of terms when it comes to seed saving. So some seed saving publications will refer to winnowing, which is basically blowing some of the chaff away if you have like a really light fluffy chaff. So you could basically do that with a blow dryer or a fan, and that would totally work. So there kind of depends on what plant, how big the seed is, what kind of material the chaff is, but those are some of the recommendations. How susceptible is basil to cross-pollination? That's a good question. I don't think that was on my list here, was it? I'm thinking that basil, you would want to give it some space. If you could shoot for that quarter-mile spacing between your basil varieties, I think you would probably be pretty safe in not having them cross. Oh, and thank you. Carolyn has put my email address in the chat. Please explain stratification and scarification process. Yeah, totally. So this is probably a process that, like Jennifer was asking about, like native seeds and flower seeds and stuff like that. Some will need stratification and scarification. So stratification is giving the seed a cooling period before you plant it, so it kind of replicates winter to the plant. And then when you take it out of that cooling environment, it kind of signals to the plant that it's spring and it's time to go ahead and germinate. And they need like so many days at a certain temperature, and it's different for a lot of different seeds. So that is something that you could do some research into if you have some of those kind of native or flower seeds, things like that. Scarification is kind of similar in that it's giving the seeds a signal. So, but instead of a temperature signal, this is more of like a physical disruption. And so to replicate the scarification, a lot of times you might rub the seed with like a light sandpaper, or shake it in a box of rocks or something like that to kind of scar it, as in the name, scarification. And that might replicate things that happen in nature, like maybe passing through the gut of an animal or something like that. And that would give the signal for the seed to that it's time to germinate. So that definitely is something that you might need to do for some seeds. And again, happy to help with research on specific seeds if you think they might need that, or you're wondering if it might need that. You could research it, or definitely call your local extension office. And vernalization, somebody added to stratification and scarification, which I'm not familiar with, Judith, actually. Feel free to type in the chat if you know. I'm not familiar with that process though.
Sherry, that's about temperature. Some seeds have to have a certain coldness, have to be hit by a certain temperature degree to
Okay. Okay. So kind of
Or that-
similar,
oh,
along the same lines as we're giving them some signal, some kind of environmental signal. Okay. So yeah, so it can get kind of complicated with some seeds, but separating passion fruit seed for your seed collection. Oh boy. Can't say that I've here in Colorado that we definitely don't grow passion fruit, but just thinking, boy, I haven't even eaten a passion fruit for many years. I would guess that there's probably that kind of some of that fermenting process that needs to go on to kind of remove any coating that would prevent germination. Not super familiar with exactly how that would be done, but Gloria, definitely happy to do that research for you and get back to you if you want to reach out. Absolutely. Is it okay to store all dehydrated seeds in the freezer for long-term storage? I'd say the refrigerator would be a more gentle and kind of better option. Some seeds probably would do great in the freezer, so that would just maybe take a little research into the specific seed. Again, happy to help you out with that research if you want to reach out. Can you save seed from store-bought produce, such as cucumbers or tomatoes? Sometimes yes, you can. You really need to know is the variety that you're saving, a hybrid or open pollinated. But I have had people have success with saving seed from the store-bought produce. There might be some issues of, these days everything's copyrighted and varieties and things like that. So there could be some issues, if you're selling them or broadcasting them widely, that the person who kind of owns that variety probably wouldn't be thrilled about it. If you're just saving them in your own garden, I don't see that they would really know, but I didn't tell you that. But yeah, usually you can, and you just kind of got to do a little research to find out about the variety and if it's a hybrid and if it'll come back true to type. What else? Anything else that I can try to cover? Well, I really appreciate everybody joining on this kind of early lunch hour. I will be posting this on our YouTube channel, so you can visit the Pueblo County Extension website, and I'll send you a link. I'll send you a link to the YouTube channel when I send you the slides in the follow-up email. And before people hop off, I would be very, very grateful